So good evening, friends. Good evening, comrades. My name is Nadira Shalhoub-Kevorkian, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to the 29th meeting of UK-Palestine entitled The Keys to Return. The keys to return are not only ontological and epistemic, but also sociospatial against the unending uprooting that frames Palestinians in 1948 land, those living in unrecognized villages, the IDPs, and more as citizens of the state. Those in occupied East Jerusalem as residents, if at all, yeah? Those in the OPT that are ID holders, and colonial violence is everywhere. So welcome to our cafe. And I want you to remember that this colonial violent dismemberment requires that we center the center and stage the keys to return, both analytically, psychologically, and morally. So with our keys to return, I want to move to voices of refusal, yeah? The event of May 2021 reminded the world how Palestinians that remained in their homeland, those defined as Palestinians of 48, spoke against state's debilitation and ongoing uprooting, demanding us to openly discuss the keys to return. When the master key requires to keep in mind that violence is the organizing principle of the colonial order. Violence, as Fanon taught us, is inherent in the colonial system itself, as it shapes all relationships between the colonizers and the colonized, while creating zones of being where the colonizer lived, with zones of non-being, with its different shapes and colors, yeah? Settler colonialism is a system of total violence, where violence infuses, penetrates, and destroys every aspect of the colonized people's life to produce, to reproduce, and maintain zones of non-being. The past week alone exposed state violence that started with guns under the counter-terrorism law banned 6 Palestinian NGOs, yeah? Entering, as Raja Shahadi, the founder of Al-Haq, stated, a new era of impunity. It continued with the settler states desecrating the Yusfiye graveyard in the old city in Jerusalem, using their bulldozers to flip the bones of the dead when the dead bodies of the incarcerated living, and when Miqdad al-Qawasmi is on his 100 day of hunger strike to refuse colonial violence. So today's Cafe Palestine will come back to our series, Testimonies from Palestine, Between Debilitation and Livability, invite you to join us to learn, to think with, and act together with those insisting on finding the keys to return, both analytically, morally, and actively, in acts of refusal, in acts of sumud. As in the wave of rage that erupted in October 2015, in July 2017, the popular action in Jerusalem sparked and inspired what Palestinians had defined the Habbi, the uprising. May 2021's Cafe Palestine is continuing, exposing that structure of power that produces racialized exclusivity, bringing voices of amazing young cultural, legal, psychosocial, and feminist activists from Palestinian land dispossessed in 1948. So the testimonies today will shed the light and offer new insights into the ordeals of Palestinians in 1948, with a focus on the 200 individuals that were arrested in May 2021 and those that are still awaiting their release, exposing what is less told but no less telling. The meeting, again, is being recorded for everybody and will later be put on the website. You are, of course, encouraged to put any questions in the chat in English or in Arabic. If anyone wants an ongoing summary in Arabic, Hadil will put her number, Hadil from Gaza, living in the UK, and will offer this by running a WhatsApp group. We will also have Lena and Rasmi translating if there's a need. She will put messages in Arabic on the chat. Let us start with the amazing voices. We will start, I don't want to talk about their definitions, but Adam will start. Adam Haj Yahya will be followed by Hala Marshood, Sohair Asad, attorney Sohair Asad, Zaina Amr, and then Ali Mwasi. So Adam, أهلا وسهلا فيك, and let's start hearing your voice, your experience, your story, your testimony. تفضل.
Hello, everyone. I'm very honored and humbled to be here, and thank you, Nadira, for an amazing introduction. I'm here today to start talking about, to kind of illustrate the reality of what Palestinian prisoners face in Palestine in general, in 48, through my own experience. I was detained on May 9th during the Haifa, the first demonstration that happened in Haifa, resisting the forced expulsion of our brothers and sisters in Sheikh Jarrah. And I want to just state the obvious, but I'm here today speaking because I am out of prison and because I have the I'm mentally healthy enough to speak about my experience, and I'm able to share it with you. Something that I feel like I'm lucky enough to have being here. But on May 9th, a group of activists, feminist, queer, and anti-colonial activists in Haifa, as well as in other parts of Palestine in 48 lands, took it to the streets to demonstrate and to protest against the colonial violence in Jerusalem, specifically in Sheikh Jarrah and in Jaffa. And it was the first demonstration that was part of the national mobilization that happened in 48 lands during the May uprising. The protest was obviously peaceful, and we took it to the streets, and we were faced with extreme policing and military kind of counter resistance. And right at the beginning of the demonstration, myself and others were detained and taken to the police station in Haifa. At the beginning, I didn't see clashes happening, but as time passed in the police station, I witnessed more and more activists entering. And as time passed, the activists that entered had clear and visible scars and wounds on them. Like as time passed during that night, I witnessed that whoever came in was more wounded, blood and force was used against our people. Now, the thing about that night is that the police came ready to attack with total disregard of what was going to happen that night. And that wasn't an exclusive case in Haifa. It was the same in Jaffa, in Akka, in Lid, everywhere basically in 48 Palestine. And I know to many it seems as a surprise that this thing happened, to the so-called like Palestinian citizens of 48. But we have a long history of violence that is seldom recognized when international audiences and organizations talk about Palestine. May I remind you of that 20 years of military rule after 48, Kufr Qasim massacre, and many other legal laws that oppress Palestinians and discriminate against them. So taking the 48 Palestinian experience as an isolated case within the general Palestinian reality is very much violent in its essence, because we do face material violence. It is true that each Palestinian community within a particular geography faces different aesthetic, jurisdictions and different violence, and we are not here to compare because comparisons never lead to a more productive discussion. But there is a lot of violence that we face as Palestinians in 48. Through my experience, I was in prison with 15 others, Palestinian activists. And it was the first night where there was a mass imprisonment and detaining of Palestinians. And we were lucky enough because the police was not prepared, I think, to detain so many Palestinians across 48 lands. And with the help of so many amazing lawyers who were predominantly women lawyers who volunteered and came and assisted us, gave us recommendations and information about how we should act and how we should behave, and calmed us down, and took care of very simple things as medical care for those who were wounded, water, comforting, emotional support. I was able to leave the police station within 24 hours with an unlegal, even to the Israeli colonial system, an unlegal condition that I wouldn't be permitted to protest or join any political or social activity that concerns Palestine. Now, these tactics that myself, but everyone else was facing, and the following mass arrest campaign that went on to prosecute and arrest Palestinians, even without protesting and being in the streets, is only an extension of Israeli colonial tactics that seek to further their domination over our mobilizations. It is not something that is isolated from, Israeli colonialism, assassinating our leaders, destroying Palestinian families, imprisoning important figures and activists who are social and political leaders within our movements, and basically dismembering our community. So we are facing this colonial segregation that seeks to separate us within different geographies. We are faced with borders that seek to isolate us. We are faced with checkpoints, but we are also faced with very particular emotional, psychological, material, and legal, under international law, tactics that seek to further fragment us. And this comes as no surprise to any of us. But what I was actually amazed and felt heartwarming to see after I left my first night in the Israeli police station and jail was the fact that I saw an amazing mobilization, mainly of feminist movements in Palestine and people on the margins who took the lead of the popular uprising in Palestine. The way that there was a neighborhood watch that was established within a night, medical teams, autonomous medical teams of doctors, nurses, and people who generally volunteered, who took it upon themselves to assist the people that were left alone, without help, without legal support, without medical support, without emotional support. Within a night, I came to see that my people more united under the severe circumstances that the Israeli colonization was imposing upon us. Yes, I think that's, I hope that I summarized my own experience to you.
Yeah.
I'm really happy to answer anything later.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Adam. I think that you put your, really, you pointed the issue of the unrecognized violence, the slow violence that we see it all the time. And only yesterday, it was the commemoration of the Kfr Qasim massacre. So these issues of the continuous dismemberment that is really debilitating, preventing us from preventing you from acting politically is part of what Walid, one of our very strong political prisoners, talks about, which is searing the consciousness. So yes, let me move to Hala. Hala Marshoud, you were one of those that were very active in the field. So we'd like to hear your testimony. Shukran ktir, Adam. We'll come back to you.
Thank you, Nadir, and thank you everyone for being here. It's my pleasure to be talking to you. I'm Hala. I'm from Haifa, but I lived 10 years in Jerusalem until last month. And I'm not just saying that because it's going to be relevant to the testimony that I'm going to give. Actually, I spent most of the events of May and a bit, started a bit before May and then continued a bit after. So all of this period, I was mainly in Jerusalem, and I guess everybody here knows how it was like in Jerusalem at that time when forced displacement was happening in Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, and attacks on worshippers in Al-Aqsa and Damascus Gate. And it was a place that didn't go silent, not only for one night during this period. And I was spending most of my time there. But then one weekend, I went to Haifa to visit my parents. And I was hearing about what is happening also in 48, and I was feeling empowered about what was happening, but I wasn't living it. I was living it in Jerusalem. That is a place that in my mind is used to being like this. It's used to being a place of constant resistance and clashes and so on. But then I went to Haifa, and there were settler attacks, or there were talks about settlers' attacks on Palestinian homes in Haifa, specifically in Wadi Nisnas neighborhood. So then I went down there, and people were ready to fight and protect their homes. And I kept thinking that it felt a bit strange that I haven't lived in Haifa for so long. And I was kind of used to seeing that in Jerusalem, and then seeing this in Haifa, and then trying to also fit in what's happening in Haifa after not being there for 10 years. And then trying to protect homes, but then hearing about other people being arrested in other Palestinian neighborhoods in Haifa, then going with a friend to see what's happening and trying to help people and trying to help those detained. And we kept hearing that settlers are going to attack more and more homes in different neighborhoods. So we kept moving around during the night, just trying to see what to do and how we can help. But then I kind of remembered for 1 second that it's not strange that Haifa in 48 is also part of this uprising. I mean, I think the reality of fragmentation that we Palestinians are living, that are caused by years of colonization, had also made us forget that colonialism works on all of us, sometimes in different ways and sometimes in similar ways. The mechanisms of violence that are operated on us in our different geographies is bound to let us take the streets. So if it's forced displacement in some places, in other places it can be also impoverishment and drowning us in poverty and crime, for example. That is also a colonial mechanism of violence. And a lot of neighborhoods in Haifa are in fact really impoverished and also face forced displacement. And some people, like in Wadi Nisnas, for example, do face the threat of expulsion from their homes by the Israeli state-owned company, Amidar. I'm not going to go into details about that because that's a whole related, but a different issue. But what I wanted to say is that what we saw in May is people from their own lived experience, from their own pain that they live due to colonial violence that is manifested on people in different ways. This is what made people take to the streets. This is what made people organize to protect their homes from settlers. And the attacks from settlers were happening for a week, almost, if not more. And every night there were threats of settlers attacking Palestinians' homes and shops, and people were organizing almost spontaneously, but in a really serious and rigorous way to protect homes. And it was actually quite empowering and hopeful seeing us as a society who Israel for years has dismantled our social solidarity structures during the years, and then seeing us being able to organize in order to protect our homes, in order to protect detainees. And I'm going to talk a bit later on about that. But what I wanted to say is that seeing this also as a person who perceives herself as a feminist was empowering because I think what we are missing and what we strive to have all the time is our ability to socially and politically practice solidarity with ourselves. And this, the years of fragmentation and the dismantling of our capacity to do that during the years, and then suddenly seeing that happening after many years during the uprising, that was what I think was a powerful moment for me, and something that gave me hope to continue, even though it wasn't easy. But what it also made me feel is that for the first time in many years, we were practicing agency. We were practicing political will. And I think this capacity has been stripped from us for years. And the fact that me and a friend were driving around trying to help whoever we can help, trying to help detainees, trying to help lawyers, trying to help attacked homes and so on. This thing that made us all wanna do something that we didn't even know what we're gonna do. Like we didn't even know what it's gonna help to go to the neighborhood or to help or to see lawyers but it was just this feeling that we wanted to do something because there was a moment in Palestine where we were all feeling also the sense of defragmentation that what was happening at that time, and the fact that everybody in all of historic Palestine was taking the streets, or everybody was trying to do something or take a role in what was happening. And for the first time in many years, we were acting as one people. And this has also been something that has been stripped from us, also due to the colonial regime, and also because we did have political leadership that also fed into this fragmentation. And I think the fact that people everywhere were able to practice politics and agency on the streets without waiting for somebody to tell them, without waiting for a leadership to say so, and without and people going to the streets from their own pain and from their own lived experience, that is a manifestation of what colonial state violence is and doing to people. I think this is what was really powerful at that moment. And I think everybody here who participated can agree that it was a moment that we were afraid to lose, and that we were constantly trying to continue. And we were constantly trying to make it continue and keep happening, even though, yes, people were tired. It wasn't easy. And I think it did come as a surprise for many of us who were waiting for a moment like this to happen, and then finding ourselves in a moment like this that was happening. I think this all gave us hope after many years of despair, I guess. And I'm gonna talk later on about the detainees fund just for a little bit, also to say how we are trying to continue in the same spirit that was during the uprising, and provide support to each other. But I'm gonna stop here.
Thank you, Hala. I think that this is exactly where, moments of meaning making and remembering that all of a sudden Haifa, Yafa, Lid, Ramli, and so on are being reoccupied and being freed again by the power of the young and of those that are in the streets. So the framing of Arab Israelis is not working. The framing of citizens is not working. Something requires challenging. I want to move to Sohair, and this is how I met Hala and Sohair 2 weeks ago, actually, when they asked me to come and speak to a group of young activists in Haifa, and hearing the voices is what brought me to ask them to come and join us in UK-Palestine. So, Ahla wa sahla, Sohair, and can you give us your own testimony and your own reading? Yislam Hala.
Thank you, Nadira, and thank you all. Thank you, Adam and Hala, and thank you for sharing this space with us. Usually, we're not used to focus on ourselves when we give a testimony on what's happening politically, and it's ironic because many of us believe in the personal is politic, but I think when you grow up in Palestine with so much oppression and pain, and at the same time, when you grow up in Palestine, situated in 48, where a geography that is perceived and a framework that is people that live in a framework that is perceived more privileged, sometimes you feel awkward speaking about your pain. And I think I'm starting from there. I'm used to public speaking a lot, but this time feels different. I think the moment of the uprising for many of us was a very intense moment. It's a moment of extreme hope, but also of extreme pain and a lot of realization of many things that we've been living for so long. Being in 48, I was during the uprising. I'm a feminist and a political organizer, but at the same time, I'm a human rights lawyer. A profession that I hate practicing inside Israel, working with law in a colonial regime and using the tools that you know that are an embodiment of the actual material violence that our people have lived during the Nakba. All this violence has become this very sophisticated legal system that most of the world are perceiving as a democratic system that have, you know, a problem of occupation on the side. And using these tools, when you are an organizer that understands the deep causes of the pain and the oppression of your own people, is very contradictory and sometimes makes you feel that you're kind of getting away from your own main mission, is to be a political organizer. But I think in the moment of this uprising, many of us human rights lawyers, I was part of a female-led human rights lawyers in Haifa, we kind of realized that what we're doing is a form of political organizing. This is not a professional work. When we meet people like Adam in the police station, when we meet the detainees, we're very aware of the limitation of what we can actually do. We know that the violence doesn't end when people are arrested. The violence doesn't end when people are wounded. At the moment they're arrested, it continues to the violence inside the police stations, but also the legal sophisticated violence of the public attorneys, of the courts themselves, and of you Palestinian having to fit what you believe in. You believe that these people and your people, you were demonstrating with them just 2 hours ago, they're protesting for your own liberation, for your freedom, for your justice, and suddenly you're in a court and you have to fit all of that into legal arguments that views them as criminals. And it's very painful, and it's something that is hard to bear. It's very hard to bear that I stopped doing that. I stopped practicing legal work inside Israel, and I only do it when there is a work of defense, when we have to do it to protect people. And I think this kind of contradiction that is growing and that I feel it now is something we always grew up with. As Palestinians in 48, maybe we experience less amount of clear and visible oppression, We don't have military occupation in the classic sense. We're not under blockade, we're not refugees, and we're supposed to be citizens. But this colonial citizenship is part of the misery and the pain that we experience, having to struggle so much to even realize that you're a Palestinian, growing as a kid, learning everything but your own history, and also learning everything that inflicts violence in your own narrative and history and identity. This conflict between seeing the pain on your family, on the people you love, on your grandmother, on your aunt that you cannot see during the Intifada because she lives in the West Bank, all this kind of pain. And then at the same time, seeing the silence of your grandmother and grandfather that were raised and lived the Nakba and the military regime, and them even, not only Israel, but them putting and inflicting surveillance on you because they are so afraid that you'll be hurt. And all these contradictions, and at the same time being banned from calling yourself Palestinian in school, in university, everywhere, having to struggle even to say that. This is such a long journey of a very sophisticated kind of violence in which you as a Palestinian has to practice how to fit your daily pain, your suffering into frameworks, into political frameworks. Forced displacement would be just a mere case of discrimination under this regime because you live in 48 and because you have to understand that you are under this citizenship framework. And all the destruction of the organizing spaces, as Hala said, and Hala spoke a lot about that. For many years, Palestinians who dared to be more radical and to challenge this framework of colonial citizenship were persecuted, these spaces were shut down, and even those who are still inside the game are all the time and constantly being pushed to the margins and pushed all the time to compromise. Now, as Palestinian young generation, when we grow up, we don't have a lot of options. We have the existing political parties in 48. We have some civil society organizations, most of which were established after the second Intifada. We're the third generation of the Nakba. We kind of grew up in a period where our generation started, are more and more calling themselves Palestinians. But even inside these political frameworks, after a while, you start to realize even the most radical frameworks are operating within fragmentation frameworks. And I think, and are forcing you so we were kind of pushed out of the liberation framework of the Palestinian people, we Palestinians in 48, and I think refugees were pushed out, and I think now Gaza is pushed out. Now we're, kind of struggling within the very limited framework of statehood in the West Bank. But at the same time, as time goes, you realize that it's also self-inflicted. You're not only pushed out of the liberation framework. I wouldn't even call it liberation. I don't know how to call it anymore. But that you kind of embody this fragmentation. You kind of start to being forced to use a kind of terminology of fragmentation. So instead of a liberation struggle of all Palestinians, you have a struggle of a minority, a national minority inside Israel. And as time goes, you feel that there is something so unnatural in the international frameworks of two states or one state, I don't know, of statehood, and the Palestinian political elite that, as Hala said, is complicit both economically and politically with the existing regime. Unfortunately, every people that struggles, there is a class that kind of benefits from the existing structures. And you start realizing that all your life you've been forced to fit all what you feel into these frameworks under the pretext of being irrational, being too radical, and not understanding politics, because politics are viewed as this power game that only probably men, and usually white men, understand. and as radical younger people, and especially women, you've viewed as less rational. And for the last few years, the amount of despair, as Hala said, that we felt as younger generation because of the oppression that also the Arab revolutions faced in the region, because of all the powers that are functioning against our liberation, the US, the international community, the capitalist system that interplays with colonialism in Palestine, and everything that has been inflicted on us. This moment of uprising was a very important moment for us. I'm not saying that what we've witnessed and what we've said is new. In the history of Palestine and in the recent years, there were a lot of movements that tried to reclaim our agency, to redefine what's going on, to redefine the Israeli regime, and therefore to redefine our own liberation. Also to understand the complexity of liberation. It's not a mechanical liberation from occupation, but it's our liberation as women, the liberation of queer communities in Palestine, the liberation of working class people in Palestine. All of this we've understand, but we felt very marginalized and pushed to the side. And I think the moment of the uprising was such a great moment of hope, despite all the pain, despite all the oppression, because we finally reclaimed power on the ground. And it's not only the power of the usual activists, the usual progressive forces on the ground, it's also the power of, as Hala said, of the most marginalized, those who were living under poverty, under crime in our community, because colonialism also creates this gap where people benefit, but people also pay the price inside the community. So as a lawyer, I saw people who are usually activists like Adam and others, but I also saw people, younger Palestinians, who are usually in crime circles. And Israel tried to label these young Palestinians because of that. But for me, what I saw in this moment is that finally we're not seen as the part of the Palestinian people who only goes to the street in solidarity with people in the West Bank and Gaza. We're going into the street because we are part of these people, and because we can link poverty, crime, forced displacement, home demolitions, everything we experience with the rest of the Palestinian people, with their pain, but also with their agency and struggle. And just, I know I took maybe too much time. And I think that moment, nobody of us waited for any political party, for any civil society organization, with all due respect. We've reclaimed agency, and the form of organizing wasn't only protesting on the street, but was also the organizing of lawyers, the organizing of psychiatrists, the organizing of many parts of our community. And we're able to see the incredible amount of power despite the oppression of pain. And I think the moment for me, the most emotional moment for me in this uprising, I saw a lot of oppression in the police station. I saw minors being threatened with death, being kidnapped by Mustaribin who dressed like civilians, being head covered. And I saw, and it was very painful, but the moment where I actually cried in the uprising is the moment when I was not in the police station. I was walking in the streets of Haifa on the day of the strike, and I'm seeing Haifa differently. And I'm seeing Haifa liberated for a few minutes maybe, or for one day. And I'm seeing the strength of our community. I'm seeing children drawing the Palestinian flag. I'm seeing people reclaiming this kind of very initial relation with what Palestine means and what liberation means to us. And I think I'll end with that. I hope I can say a little bit more about hope in the next part.
Amazing. Thank you. Shukran ktir. Thank you, Suhair. I guess that it's I'm lost for word after your what you have said, but you know, this thing of we write the narration, we do not need a permission to narrate, if I'm using Edward Said, and the power of the street, and not fitting into the framework that were really constructed for us, but rather creating our own paths, a third path. I want to move to Zena. That fits very well after your voice. Zena, are you with us?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Nadra, and thank you, Adam, Hala, Suhair. It was incredible hearing you again. it was incredible because I think every time I hear us talking about this past period, I also get very, very emotional. I return to that state of mind, like to that emotional state of remembering how many complex feelings surge through me as I listen to these experiences. And I started remembering all of the details of that period. So yeah, just starting with that. But I also want to note that I'm actually not from the Palestinians of 1948. I'm actually someone who grew up in Ramallah and has been separated from the rest of my community in whether it be in Lid and Haifa and Akka and elsewhere in 1948. And so I'm speaking from my place in Ramallah, but also in how I've experienced this habbe, and how it was also a time that significantly reiterated how important it is to really like let go completely of these illusions of fragmentation, right? So and I think so at that time I, like many people, were really invigorated by this, the visual, the experiential, like what we're hearing. Everyone's not sleeping because we're trying to figure out what is happening on the ground, who's with who. And being in Ramallah, I'm not able to go to Haifa or to Yafa at a moment's notice. And it's not because I don't want to, but at that time, I'm not allowed to by the Israeli enforced laws on us. So I'm stuck in Ramallah. I'm trying to figure out how I can have a role. And I think lots of people really yearned at that point, really wanted to figure out what my role is. Like everyone is asking themselves, okay, so we can go on the streets, we can like participate in demonstrations, we can write, I don't know, like everyone was trying to do something. And one of the most apparent forms was going on the street, but it still felt that it wasn't enough almost. So I knew that there were some psychologists and social workers who are getting together in order to organize support for persons who have experienced detention, especially like adults, but also minors who were detained by Israel at that period. And I'm not clinically trained. I'm in the field of mental health, but as a researcher, but I was still very keen. And so I contacted this group, and I felt the privilege of being able to talk to them and hear from them, but I wasn't able to be there. And there was a need of being there, and to be able to provide this support for those who are experiencing the detention and other forms of violence. So I kept in contact with a few people who are friends of mine who are in the field of mental health. And because of this continuous feeling of like, what should I do? What should we do? Like this individual responsibility to the collective, like feeling that I must do something that is part of the collective. I must have some sort of role, because I can't sit do nothing. So I didn't have much of a role. And what would have been also wonderful to hear is actually the experiences of the psychologists and the social workers who volunteered their time to support the detainees and those who were experiencing violence from Israel, because they did amazing work. And as Suhair was saying, and as everyone was saying, that the work wasn't only the provision of the service, but it was actually the organizing that was happening, because there was clear understanding that if this part wasn't played, there will be a huge gap in the trajectory of what was happening. So it was a political need to volunteer and do these services. And this was also because if these services were not provided by volunteers, then especially in the case of minors, Israeli courts, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Sahir and Hala and Adam, Israeli courts can assign murafaqa accompaniment for the minors. And this is also dangerous. It could be potentially dangerous because it's important to have someone who understands the political reality of the Palestinian people, and to not put them at risk or endanger them in the way that they speak or say anything about their experience. So I really wanted that to be very clear for everyone, that these volunteers were not only the organizing is important, and feeling that political need is important, and the fact that this was also draining, this is a lot of labor and emotional investment. And so it was at that time when friends of mine also were talking about how it's not only thinking of the political spheres alone, or what was happening politically that is being discussed continuously, but it was also the emotional that was being talked about a lot, and that we didn't really clearly, it wasn't very clear to some of us how to approach this, the emotional dimensions. So a couple of friends and I started thinking that maybe we should write actually about this part of the experience, that writing, documenting, and analyzing the emotional without separating it from the political, how it is completely connected, is something that we needed to do, and that was something that I participated in, and it was really we're still writing, so it is important for us to be doing it, and it's just about how each person always tries to find something to do, and there are so many roles that are being played, some that are very visible, some less visible, but people are continuously trying to figure out where they fit into this liberatory route, really, even if it doesn't always feel like that. So yes, that's all.
Thank you, Zaina. I guess that this is one of the messages that writing, singing, thinking, acting, and that no one can silence connectivity, hope, and futurity in such a condition. I want to move this way to Ali Mouassi, that would take us to another space of dealing with the question, so what can I do? How can I move? In order to come back to you and ask you, so what did you do? Where is the hope? Where's futurity? Because that power of debilitation in all its front, the violence of the justice system, the violence of the educational system, the violence of the different systems that's supposed to so-called help kids, according to what Zaina was telling us, is not exactly there to help, but rather to silence and reframe the story. And where do we come? So Ali?
Good evening. Thank you, Nadira. It's my pleasure to be part of this event. Zaina, Hala, Suhair, Adam, big thanks to you. You're amazing guys. So I will start. It's kind of a story that I wrote. It's a narration. So I will share it with you. My road led me to her 10 years later. So I told her what her son was saying in that dark moment between his presence in her life and his forced exclusion from it. What was he saying? She asked with passionate calmness after learning I was there. He was calling for you. Yamma, Habibti Yamma, Mom, my love, Mom. That day, that dark moment during the first days of the second Intifada, October 2000, my uncle Jamal rode his car and found me by Ash-Shabra, the name given to the southern entrance of my village, where the main street climbs the hill towards Jat, and where tens of Israeli soldiers and police officers gathered to reaffirm their occupation of our home. They had one tank to show strength. In a few days, they will have many more, along with armored vehicles and helicopters that will pass through the sky and streets of my village towards the nearby cities and villages of the West Bank, which in a few years will be separated from us by the apartheid wall. Uncle's screams forced me into his car. He wanted to take me back home. You are too young for these things. Get in the car. Suddenly, he jerked the car around and sped up behind a Subaru that had blood dripping from its right back door. The Subaru reached the WM Medical Center and stopped at the entrance. There, Uncle stopped his car and hastily got out. I followed suit and stood by the door of the Subaru. The young man was in someone's arms. The hands of nurses and helpers pulled him out of the car. Blood gushing from above his left eye where a dark hole was. His white t-shirt and jeans painted red, and a golden necklace with a hand holding a rock hanging from his neck. I later find out that his name was Rami Gharra, one of almost 5,000 martyrs killed by Israel in the years of the Second Intifada. And I'll see the eyes of his mother and father many times later in the annual events marking the Intifada. 10 years later, the road led me, a journalist wanting to continue the story, to his house, perhaps so I can complete one of many still open circles, and for his mother to hear his last words, calling her through my lips. For 20 years afterward, we kept running, my generation and I, through streets, alleyways, squares, universities, and colleges. It was mutual attrition. Israel wearing us down, we wearing Israel down. Israel chasing us, we chasing Israel. Every time Israel closed the door, we opened a window. Every time it demolished a balcony, we dug a tunnel, exactly how our ancestors had done for 100 years of constant attempts to steal our home country and culture. 20 years of running through wars, clashes, arrests, intimidation, and uprisings. I left the country in 2019 on a tour of studying, volunteering, and writing. I was tired, frustrated, and disappointed in the wake of internal Palestinian conflicts, the defeat of the Arab Spring in the face of dictatorships and their armies supported by the global imperialist empires, and the powerlessness of civil society organizations. I understood from my stay in South Africa, Greece, Serbia, Bosnia, from the still open wounds of those countries, from the stories of refugees and immigrants on the roads of the Balkans, from the residents of the poverty neighborhoods at the outskirts of Johannesburg and Cape Town, from the tired faces, the dreamy hearts, the broken spirits, the militant songs, the stubborn dreams. I understood that the trouble was bigger than my home country, and that the ugliness of the global system affects so much more than my people, and that standing up to the lack of justice, to the logic of privilege, which favors one people over another, one human being over another, needs a moral revolution that will establish a new system with morals and concepts that will strike tyranny supremacy, and exploitation in every possible direction. 2 years later, I returned home even more exhausted, disappointed, and angry to find myself face to face with the Al-Quds uprising from April to June of 2021. I was worried, stressed, and scared of the hysteria of the Jewish nationalists in the form of an army, police, media, and gangs of extremist nationalists who roamed the streets of Haifa, Akka, Lod, and other cities searching for Arab praise. I was powerless to do anything, feeling completely helpless and unwilling. Al-Gharbi, my town, was a center of protests and activities. Having decided to be part of them, I witnessed young people, some born in the late 90s and early 2000s, calling for the right of return and national unity, chanting against colonialism, apartheid, collaborators, Arab complacency, and global silence for Gaza, Sheikh Jarrah, Al-Aqsa, and Lod. In their eyes, I saw glowing anger. They listened intently and talked passionately. Their discourse was one of defiance and resistance. They were full of energy and pride. Some of them were students I had taught at school from which the Israeli institution tried their best to push me out. For the education system is run by the Israeli intelligence agency, which prohibits progressive national Palestinian discourse. We all wondered, how did these young people learn these terms? Where did they acquire this language and these concepts from, especially after the targeting of disrupting political movements and their leaders and activists, and the harassment and restriction of the Palestinian civil society? How can this generation, accused of living on Instagram and TikTok, do all this? Sorry. I recalled myself when I was at school, when Uncle Jamal came to take me home during the second Intifada, that day when I met Amara. The feeling of oppression and injustice is an excellent teacher, and learning through experience, living, and internship is a phenomena that is difficult to control, exactly like everyday resistance. Even if Israel takes away our right to learn our history, the geography of our country, and our cultural identity in school, and forbade teaching in Arabic in colleges and universities, we know how to learn and understand things on our own. During the uprising, when some non-Arab friends wrote to ask if I was okay, I shared a video with them with this comment: I was there, on top of a truck with tens of others on top of and around it. I took this video from the funeral of 17-year-old Muhammad Jabalin from Al-Fahm. Muhammad was the president of the student body at his school. They shot him while sitting in a car. The bullet hit his head near his eye. His town is near ours. We call those killed by the police or the army shaheed. This is the funeral of a shaheed. It didn't occur to me that the video would bring forth questions of this kind, but they are singing and clapping. Why music at a funeral? I collected my thoughts and sent them this message. This is how we are when one of us is killed. This is how we together decided to be without knowing why or how, or when it started being this way, and without planning from anyone. They hit us, so we dance, sing, ululate, chant, and recite poetry. We also cry, wail, and pray. We do all of these things together. And I don't know how to explain it logically, and I don't need to. This is how we uphold a life we refuse to be taken from us unjustly. Sadness, the color of murdered joy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you. How do we move from scenes of death and the creation of dawns of death to the celebration of life, to music, to chanting, to crying, and to crying in order to continue life? So I want to move back. I want to move back to Adam and to ask, because it is very complex psychologically, and we do not want to deny the complexity of our psychological state of mind when everything, despair, injustice, but at the same time, the power of the continuation, the fact that you were taking the video, the fact that you were celebrating the continuation and the continuity against the non-being, against the constant dispossession and dismemberment. Adam, can you tell me, how do we act against the constant debility, against the constant dismemberment? You're right, we have really little time, and I really want our audience to ask you questions and engage with your very powerful testimonies. Adam?
Yes, thank you everyone for amazing testimonies and perspectives. I think it touches on everything, a lot of things that everyone has said. I think the last May uprising showed us that liberation and decolonization is not abstract theory. It's actually an everyday practice. I think within the uprising, we were seeing and we were bombarded with a lot of images that were difficult, but also within these images, we saw a lot of inspiring and hopeful demonstrations of hope and of liberation. When we saw our Palestinian refugees who stand in solidarity with the people of Sheikh Jarrah, when we saw the most marginalized communities and the most impoverished between us take the lead and stand in the front line of the demonstrations, when we saw the youngest between us assume positions of leadership and of power and of confidence, these are moments of hope. These are moments of happiness. I remember that day in Haifa, where it was actually the first day after a week and a half of severe settler and military violence, of attacks on our homes, of Israelis just roaming the streets, trashing cars and attacking us. People found it within them to take it to the street, to sing, to paint the walls, we called it we're having a wedding and we're marrying our homeland. And it was an event that took place in every Palestinian public space that we were feeling so alienated from for too long, in Wadi Nisnas, in Akka, in the market, even in spaces that we feel so alienated from because they are facing severe colonization. We reclaimed them as ours. We reclaimed our language to be practiced very proudly in the public space. We connected despite all of the divisions that separate us, and that as the Suhair said, most of the time it's self-inflicted, but it's also like inflicted upon us because of the colonization that we are facing. And we found it within us, despite everything, despite the pain, despite the violence, despite the military occupation, despite the dispossession, to actually continue and move forward. Because, I mean, that's why I think a lot of people connect with the Palestinian cause, regionally and internationally, because our people have showed resilience despite everything. I mean, we've been fighting relentlessly 73 years after, and we're not going to back down. And I think that's one of the most important things that we have witnessed and regained and reinstated during the last May uprising. And again, I think liberation is a practice. It's not something theoretical. It's not abstract. It's an everyday endeavor that we are all engaging in.
Shukran. Hala?
Yes. Well, I'm going to talk about hope with a live example. And I saw that Lara posted on chat the link for the Dignity Fund. And I would like to talk a bit about that because for me, this is our way of continuing the moment of hope and resistance that started in May. And this fund is actually with the efforts and help of a group of volunteer lawyers, female lawyers, Baladna Arab Association, which is Palestinian civil society organization in 48, and a group of activists came together in order to organize this fund. This fund is basically trying to do three things. First of all, it's trying to continue the practice of political solidarity with each other, because at the moment there are 200 facing indictments of those who were arrested during the uprising, and many of those are minors, and in that the Israeli regime is trying to crush the spirit of an entire generation. And also most of the detainees are also working class from the most impoverished families here. And this is also a deliberate action by a colonial regime to target those that are most impoverished in order to impoverish them even more. But it's also because these are the communities that are easier to label as criminals, and this is what Israel is trying to do with the detainees. So the fund is our attempt to practice actual solidarity with the families of the detainees who are in actual need of financial assistance. And it's not only that, it's also centering the issue of those marginalized and of those that are being directly targeted by the Israeli regime. And the fund is here to say that we do have a collective responsibility to practice solidarity with our detainees. Now, the funds are going to cover some of the costs of the lawyers. In some cases, there weren't lawyers to accompany the detained, so the fund itself provided lawyers, and really any kind of contribution to the fund is valuable. At the moment, we are at the process of closing the fund. And there was also a global campaign from activists worldwide who also joined in to support and help. So really, this is a call to everybody here to contribute either by donating through the link or by spreading the word. The link you can pay through PayPal or Visa, and PayPal has a limited price that you can put, the donation, that you can put. And if you want to contribute more, donate more, you can do that through a bank transfer to Baladna, the association. So if you want more information on that, I'm going to leave my email here in the chat. You can contact me directly. And please, and see this like we see it. See this as a continuation of Palestinian resistance. Thank you.
Shukran, Hala. May I say that the indictments against Palestinians were 200 versus the indictments against Jewish Israelis were around 8, if I'm not mistaken, or 7. So you can see the difference in the time where everybody was in the streets and pogroms against Palestinians were all over the news. Suhair, how do you see your path to hope, to power, to livability? Your way, your eyes.
So after the uprising, I think many of us experienced a moment of despair, which is weird because we've been just in a moment that reassured the way we see Palestine, the way we see our people. But for some reason, we couldn't just accept the fact that we're going back to normalization with the pain, to normalization with the oppression, and moving from a revolutionary moment, an extreme revolutionary moment, to working politically, slowly, building the infrastructure for people to be protected. For such a moment to come back again is not always easy to kind of adjust to again. But I guess now I feel that this process, this revolutionary process, and this moment has to be seen in light of the recent years. These years that we've witnessed escalation of Israeli violence. Yes, we've witnessed defeat of Palestinian political elite. Yes, we've witnessed compromises over our rights. Yes, we've witnessed the Arab revolutions in the region being killed. And why those revolutions were so important to us, I think those revolutions were the moment where we saw that the liberation of Palestine is not a technical question linked to regimes or to any leadership, but rather a question of justice. And through that, through seeing the most marginalized in the region marching in the street and then being faced by all the oppression of the regimes, by all the oppression of the imperial powers in the region, we were able to reflect on Palestine itself. We were able to reflect on the liberation of Palestine. I think as a Palestinian woman, as a feminist, I think, and any marginalized groups in our community, you see and you feel the colonial oppression in a different way, in a much more complex way. And I think from that position, you kind of gain lenses. It's not about you being a woman. It's not about womanhood. At least feminism for me is not about that. It's about these lenses where you can see justice, injustice in its details. And I think the uprising moment was a moment that our voices, these voices in Palestine in the recent years, where we spoke about fragmentation and its harm to our community. We spoke about violence in our community that was nurtured by the Israeli colonialism, where we spoke about class and poverty and crime, where we spoke about the continuous pain inflicted in our community by the colonial oppression. If we're speaking about May, Adam was one of 2,000 people to be detained in May. Adam left after 24 hours, but there are around 200 people either still in jail in 48 alone, or in home arrest, or in any other different conditions that Israel is continuing to inflict violence, economic violence, psychological violence, material violence on them and on their families. 85 of them are minors who are raised to understand that this great moment, this revolutionary moment, is framing them as criminals. And I think this moment and our main mission now is to build on the power and on the hope that we saw in May, despite all the pain and despite the fact that it's very hard to go back to slowly building. And I think the fund that Hala spoke about is one example where we, the lawyers and the activists in the community and civil society organizations, decided to come together and to make sure that people will not continue to pay the cost alone. And I'll say something finally about hope. I think and Hala and I are part of a feminist movement in Palestine called Tal'at. And the slogan of Tal'at is, no, there is no free homeland without free women. And I think there is no free Palestine without all of us being free. And I think 2 years ago when Tal'at was launched, one of the main slogans that we had is redefining Palestinian liberation and redefining politics that have been turned into politics of power, politics of oppression, even by Palestinians toward Palestinians, turning them into politics of justice. And I don't think in Palestine and globally, for oppressed people, there is any rational way to live with accepting injustice, and for us, politics would be around justice. So Palestine in this case is not only being liberated from Israel, but also what kind of Palestine we want to imagine. And we've been taught for so long that we're living on politicals of surviving, of survival, of just being okay, of just like surviving under the system. And I think we're not willing to compromise that again. And we're not willing to back up because we've gained power in the street and we have our allies, our sisters and brothers in the Arab region, but also globally, who are fighting anti-racist struggles, anti-imperialist struggles, anti-capitalist struggles. And we see ourselves as the younger generations as part of this struggle. So I would just say, because we're in a context of solidarity, we're in a context of speaking of people who are not, many of which are not Palestinians, I don't think that Palestine should be seen as this one lump. I think inside our community has a lot of gaps and contradictions and discussions and different ways of seeing and understanding Palestine. And what I would like people to see is to see the complexity of our liberation struggle, to de-exceptionalize it. For so long, people has exceptionalized it. Oh, it's so complicated. We don't know what it's very simple. It's a struggle for justice, but also for us Palestinians, to de-exceptionalize it in a way that our struggle is unique, yes, but it's not exceptional. It's part of a wider global struggle against colonialism and power and different oppression systems. And I think when understanding that, we don't feel isolated as long. We're not only this younger generation that is marginalized and pushed, who is fighting colonialism, fighting capitalism, and fighting Palestinian political elite, but we are part of a global power of feminists, of queer people, of working class people, of indigenous people, Black people all over the globe fighting this system. And the way our oppressors are cooperating, are learning oppression techniques, and are learning from each other tools. I think the mission for us now in Palestine and globally is to do that exactly. And as Palestinians, we feel very comfortable and very confident saying that after May, and we might have a few years of despair again. We kind of normalize with that. It's hard to get back to that, but I think we always need to remind ourselves that we're not alone in that this is a much wider global fight for powers, for reclaiming politics, for reclaiming agency, for reclaiming our place in this world. And yeah, I hope justice is a process and a revolution is a process. I know there is a lot of hope in what I'm saying, but it's important for me to reassure, besides pain and oppression, to reassure our agency and the hope that is holding us and making us continue.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Suhair. We need to start wrapping up, and I will give like Zaina only a minute or two, and Ali a minute or two to tell us their own and share with us their own opinion about hope and livability.
Thank you. I think the moment of hope, or like the feeling of hope for me, was that the more time passed after like the crux, let's say, or the climax of the May Habbe, I do recognize that there were like a lot of complex feelings happening. So yes, despair, but also like hope, and also like yearning for things to happen, or like the continuation of actions to take place, but also the realization that we can't keep at the like level of like extreme actions all the time. So I think it was the realization that people are trying to find out ways of doing things, but in also very creative ways of doing things. So for example, friends and I were inspired by the presence of people on the streets, including their children and families, and telling stories and singing songs that relate to the Palestinian struggle. And we started wanting to also write stories that speak not only about the Palestinian struggle, but really working on this sense of how do you instill values that are anti-colonial, anti-capitalist, feminist, into the young people's stories, to have them connected to what is going on politically without being marginalized or not feeling that they're not part of the story, because we are all in it. So it's this sense of yes, understanding the complexity, but also looking at the different parts of the community and seeing how each part can do something, and the creativity of what we can do, each in our own roles. So that very quickly would be one.
Thank you, Zaina. I move to Ali.
Okay, I don't know how to make it short, but I will try. There's a poet, his name is At-Tugharra'i. He's a Persian poet. He wrote in Arabic like 1,000 years ago. And he said, "Ma adyaq al-aisha lawla fushatul amali." Life will be very hard without a spot of hope. So hope in my eyes is how it's relate to start talking about what we want as individuals and as people. What we want now, what we want after 5 years or 10 years or 100 years. What's the society that we want? What the rights that we want? And I think that in our discourse now in Palestine, we struggle, we fight, but we don't talk deeply about what we want. We don't really share that in a wide point of view, that just to solve a specific problem or a specific issue. So it's to create hope. I think that a lot of agencies, activists, lawyers, doctors, intellectuals, politicians should start think about what the new I want and we want as people and as society. During the uprising, I could see from the discourse of the new generation that the term the term state, it wasn't there. The solution of one state or 2 states or 10 states, it wasn't there. What they talked about in art, in music, in literature, in protesting, in chanting, it was about freedom. To be freedom from a system which is very a violated regime and system, to be freedom from the power of control their life, and to feel free from a lot of structures that not just Israel put us inside, but also the official regime, the Palestinian official regime, and the official parties that they used to use specific tools to deal with the colonial situation. So I believe in art, I believe in culture, I believe in knowledge as a way to change, to create concepts, to do things. These days, these years, I can see that there's about 500 events, cultural events happen in Palestine, and it's organized by the new generation and independent people far away from the centric political system, how it was for 70 or 60 years. And it's a point of hope that people create with no hierarchy and someone, and they don't need someone to tell him what to do. And this is for me a big point to feel hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you very much. I think that I would like to open for questions, for reflections to the amazing voices, the very honest, actually, voices of.
I do have a view on that. I mean, after I wrote my book about.
Yes. I'm sorry. Okay. Let me see who would like to ask a question. Okay.
Could I say something?
Yes, Martin.
Thank you very, very much for sharing all that you've done today. It's been, really powerful and extraordinary and very moving. I was one of those who, before 2014, when I first visited 48, the same year, in fact, we met Nadra for the first time, had the idea that the problems were in the occupied territories, if you like, without any real understanding or insight into what was happening or what had happened really in 48. And it was obvious, talking to colleagues we met in Nazareth and the Galilee and Akka, that this was an ongoing and the racism and the it's clearly as much an issue inside 48 as it was anywhere else. I think that the world's obsession with the two-state solution is one way of completely and continuing to exclude, to look away from anything that happens within 48 and to disregard it as an issue. But just to say, I mean, there's one sort of vague part of this, which is listening to your personal experiences. I could sit for hours actually and listen to, experiences of what it was like growing up. I'm fascinated with the idea of this kind of colonial education and how one emerges and sort of keeps hold of oneself and one's identity and sense of collectivity and so forth in those circumstances. Could listen on and on. I only have one real specific question. In the way Ali kind of answered it in one sense, I was going to say, has this, although you're describing something which is so richer and deeper than a political program, has it changed the status of the one democratic state movement? And so Ali related to this, but my one thought about what Ali said was that there have been a number of social movements and uprisings, in a sense, within many countries over recent years, which haven't had a program or a party or and one of the reasons perhaps that they haven't taken off, one of the reasons they've appeared to be short-lived and so forth, might be because there hasn't been a program and a party attached to them. So I'm just wondering, what has the notion of a one democratic state changed as a consequence of what happened in May?
Thank you, Martin. There was a couple of questions by Hiba. If you can ask them, and then we'll go back to the speakers. Hiba?
Yes, thank you. If I can find them in the chat box. Yes, can you talk to us about the psychological effect of desacralizing the Yusufiyya graves? And also, can you speak to the necessity of resistance for mental health? And a third point, which is, yes, I mean, the idea of the martyrdom. This is a very different understanding we have about that in Palestine. Can you clarify further, please?
Okay. So who would like to react?
There is a question also in the chat, Nadira.
Yeah. Is there another question?
There is one from Pauline, I think, about why none of us has used the word apartheid.
Okay. So would you like, since you're already on the screen, Suhair. Would you like
No,
to take it?
maybe
And then we'll
my
go
colleagues
to-
would like to start first.
Okay. Ali, would you like to reflect on the issue of martyrdom and resistance, as this is very important for mental health? I guess that this is what Hiba is trying to pass, because yeah, to regain our mental health, resistance is very healthy, rage is very healthy, reacting and acting is very healthy against the uprooting, to reroot. And I guess this is something that should be really staged powerfully in our. So I was wondering, because Ali really brought the power of Rami Gharra, the dead body of Rami Gharra, and then Muhammad Jabarin's dead body to the forefront. But then you said you were talking about the power to dream, to think, to sing, to write, and so on, about hope. So can you share with us your thoughts, Ali?
Okay, Martin, thank you very much about your question and thoughts. I'm not sure if I have now a clear ideas, but my feelings or okay, well, I was a member in a political party, and I really now think that all of the political system that it's work in Palestine, it can't lead us for any new situation. So what I think that we can do in the near future, or maybe in the far future, is to start think about new methods and new strategies to create a modern political act and movement, which is a cooperation between social movements, youth movements, and to set and to write again our social contract as a society and people. Because one of the main problems that we face today, these days, that we have one social contract as Palestinians, and we don't have one point of view. We feel and we know that this colonial system occupy us, and we reject to stay in the situation, but we don't until now create one social contract that can answer our dreams, requests, hopes as people and also as individuals. One state solution, for me also, the answer or the solution is not about a state. It can be like a new state, new regime, but it's open and it's part of a solution in all the area, which included we in the Middle East and the Arab area. And I don't know why we have to accept and respect the borders that someone came and put for us and decided for us. I need to be also part from Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Egypt, because this is the normal and the natural environment for me. So if it's good for the Jewish and the Israeli people, they are welcome for me. If they will about the
let go.
Yeah, about the Zionism values and point of views, political point of views. And if they want to be part of this area, they are welcome. If they don't want, this is not my problem. I don't feel and believe that me as a victim need to give any solution for the people who control me and destroyed my country and my home and also my future. So
Okay. Okay, I think that Ali is telling us sometimes leaving us with questions is very important. Any other reflections?
Yeah, I can jump in if no one else wants to talk.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so there are 4 questions, so I'll try to answer maybe 2 of them. I want to reflect more on the one democratic state. So I know there are a lot of Palestinians who are very close to us politically, who are working on that direction. I'm not sure what about my comrades here, but personally, the question of solutions is very exhausting to me and draining, because I think for so long, we Palestinians have been put under the burden of not only bearing with the pain and the oppression and struggling and resisting, but also thinking about just solutions for all. And I think for many of us, a state is not a question. Fighting for regimes and for statehood is not a question, because so far the way this has worked for us was bad, because people, when they're so occupied with the question of statehood, start to create the structures, and usually the structures of oppression before the state even comes. And you can look at the PN, you can look about different forms of regimes. And what we're trying to create on the ground and to create in the level of discourse is a different model. It's a model of resistance and of fighting for liberation that would be more sensitive to people, that will centralize people, that will centralize their experiences, their pain, and will turn this, what sometimes it seems to be individual pains, try to link it to the collective pain and turn this into description of where we're living and into tools and strategies of struggle. So for me now, what May has done and what I have believed even before is what we want to centralize is liberation and not states. So I'm not sure, maybe it's a short answer. As for the apartheid question, I think for me, usually I would prefer to use settler colonialism, and I'm not getting into too much academic discussions about terminology, but I think sometimes apartheid, also because I come from the human rights world, even the experience of apartheid in South Africa is taking out of the colonial context, of the settler colonial context, and is viewed as only a question of segregation and discrimination. And we're very sometimes concerned. I'm not saying it's illegal to use, but I'm saying sometimes we're concerned that this aspect of oppression on Palestine, aspects of segregation and discrimination would dominate over other aspects of the Israeli regime. For me, I know it's very useful. Sorry, there is some. Nadim, I don't know who's here.
Yeah, you need to mute him. Yeah.
So I was saying, I know it's useful for internationals who want to be in solidarity with Palestine to describe something beyond occupation. But for us Palestinians, there is an Israeli regime, there is a Zionist regime, and we know it, and we know its uniqueness. And of course, there are a lot of aspects that are similar to the apartheid in South Africa, but I don't think labeling it is important that much for us. And I think we can still make these links with many oppressive frameworks. And just one last word about psychology and healing. I'm not a psychologist, but I'm a feminist again. And I think one of the things that feminism can give you in a very oppressive political atmosphere, not only vis-a-vis the Israeli regime, but also inside our organizing frameworks and organizing structures, is that sometimes when you live that much of oppression, sometimes struggle becomes so automatic in a way that it oppresses our interaction with what we're feeling and what we're experiencing with this system. And I think for me, I don't know how to be a healthier, mentally healthier person under colonialism. I haven't figured that out. I don't think anyone would ever figure that out. I think this we will continue to live with this heavy cost, but I think definitely organizing is a one space to take this pain and turn it into a collective pain, like understanding as part of the collective pain, and then turn that pain into action, into struggle, into tools that we can use. It's not magic. It's still very hard, but I think in Palestine, this is the only way to be relatively sane, I think, for me, and to be balanced and to be able to continue and to kind of walk the path of healing, which I don't think you can achieve as long as colonialism is here and as long as oppression is here.
Thank you. Thank you, Sahar. This is a great way to end our cafe. And I guess that this is exactly where, like, if we're talking about feminist power, to see and unpack the workings of power, feminism is also to remember always that we have the power to change things. And this is very healthy, and this is very part of the mental health. So I want really to end by saying that occupation, as we have seen, is also psychological, even if it's framed, if it's not framed as such territorially, yeah? And here, if we unpack and understand, we can also erase occupation and we can decolonize. May 2021, the Habbi was defined, as we have heard today, as hope, as the Habbi of hope and dignity that carries no borders, min al-Quds, from Jerusalem to Haifa, to Jaffa, to Gaza, and for sure not for those that the borders were imposed on them by the colonizers. It breaks border. And here in UK-Palestine, we try to carry our keys to return, all of us, yes, not only Palestinians by birth, but Palestinians by choice, yeah, to speak pain, to speak courage, to speak agony against the violence of the state. So the streets of Palestine in the different places, all Palestine, are the biggest narrators against debility, against injustice, against despair. And this is mental health, to go to Hiba's point, in my view. It's the preservation of connectivity. It's us rerouting, like really refusing the uprooting, reassembling against dismemberment. And yes, rage is healthy. Resistance is healthy. Art is healthy, writing is healthy, wailing is healthy, screaming, singing, gathering, sharing, refusing the machinery of death and anti-death with this collective solidarity. And this collective solidarity is liberatory. It is a decolonial act of refusing occupation and dispossession. And we at UK-Palestine joined the amazing voices, those amazing acts that we have heard